Welcome back to this track. We're continuing to talk about PDF UA, tagged PDF, accessible PDF, and all that kind of excitement. I'm going to talk a little bit about empowering tools for tagged PDF support, the features users need to produce PDF UA conforming files. And unlike in my previous presentation, I've deliberately attempted to restrict myself in terms of the slides I'm going to present. And I'm going to ask you ahead of time to think about the questions that you might have for me on this subject. I'd very much like to see any kind of questions you might have. I specialize in looking like in attempting to do this and routinely failing to provide enough time for people to ask me questions. So I want to very much encourage you to think in those terms this time. So I want you to first of all consider that we as a PDF industry need to get interested in tagged PDF before the customer does. Obviously, there are many categories of customers who have been interested in accessibility for a long time. That group is growing. Now, the history you've already heard about in some detail. I won't spend too much time on it. Almost everything about tagged PDF dates from 2001. There are very minor additions and changes made in PDF 1.5, which showed up a few years later. Nonetheless, that was, I guess that was 12 years ago. Adobe systems aside, and Adobe, by the way, is in many ways to be very highly complimented for their efforts with respect to accessible PDF. They did invest a tremendous amount in it. They've produced an accessibility API that's, to my knowledge, is not replicated in other PDF viewers at this time. And so they get a lot of credit, and of course, as usual, when it comes to end users, they also get a lot of blame for the things that they didn't do. And people only remember the things that drive them nuts, as you're well aware as software developers. You can make them happy, but you make them sad, and you'll hear all about it. So Adobe aside, implementations are relatively scarce for tagged PDF. Tagged PDF is relatively underused out there. Implementations of tagged PDF and of PDF UA in particular are now taking off. Number one, government regulatory agencies are getting less and less, they're becoming more and more interested in using standards-based definitions of functionality to require from their vendors. The days are moving on from where the government used to sit down and have their own little committee that sat around and dreamed up some sort of specification. I'm thinking of Section 508 in the United States as an example. This was sort of a government effort. It was relatively successful in its way, but it was certainly not standards-based. It wasn't necessarily driven by a lot of technical expertise, and it wasn't particularly effective at driving large-scale software development. However, governments have figured out, or are figuring out quite rapidly now, that the international standards of one form or another are an excellent way to make vendors toe the line in terms of delivering the kinds of products and services that the government is interested in promoting. There's also very much increase, certainly in the United States, and I believe it's also true in Europe. I know it's particularly true as well for our friends in Australia and other places. There's increased awareness of accessibility as a matter for private and public sector regulation. It's not yet the case in the United States that private companies are being ordered by the government to produce websites and other content in an accessible fashion. Right now, the government restricts those requirements to itself and to public agencies that are partially funded by the government. That situation is potentially going to be changing in the United States. Among other things, a lot of people are looking towards the Americans with Disabilities Act as a potential leverage point where the Department of Justice will change the regulations and begin to insist, as a matter of civil rights, that websites and documents and so on be accessible. And I think it's, you probably haven't heard it first from me, but I certainly wouldn't want you to feel in any way surprised if these kinds of requirements begin to come down the road in the near future. Another major factor in driving implementation of tagged PDF and PDF UA is increased support for WCAG 2.0, which is W3C's effort to develop accessibility standards for web content. It's not so much that WCAG 2.0 is so fantastic for discussing accessible PDF. I won't wade into that one at this particular moment in time. But it is most definitely raising the temperature in terms of vendors being understood giving vendors a target for their implementations from a web content point of view, but also really from other points of view as well. Fundamentally, with respect to PDF specifically, and this is in no small part probably as a direct function of the development of PDF UA, there's an increased awareness, including in the web community. The WCAG 2.0 is fundamentally web technology centric. It's really the way it's written, and this is particularly true in certain aspects of it, is very, very specific to HTML, CSS, JavaScript type of technologies. Not necessarily adequate, nor certainly interoperable guidance from the point of view of PDF accessibility. Of course, we would, the implementation of tagged PDF is, I think, well, I shouldn't say of course, but I believe it's also very much coming to the fore, at least in the PDF technology space, as a function of the publication last year, in August of last year, of PDF UA, ISO 14289, which has, as I mentioned in my earlier presentation, already resulted very demonstrably in spurring a great deal of development on the part of a variety of developers, both of libraries and applications as well. I'm talking over my next bullet here, there is, because due to the publication of ISO 14289, and I've spent some time going around and talking to various implementers in the PDF technology space and asking them, why are you doing this? Why did you wait 12 years after tagged PDF after tagged PDF was added to the PDF specification? Why did it take 12 years for you to start to support this part of the PDF reference? The answer was, it was kind of vague, kind of fuzzy. Nobody said we had to, and there wasn't really an international standard telling us how we should go about achieving these things in some sort of fashion. Now there is, and that particular reason to not invest in accessibility in PDF technology has now gone away. There's also some real truth to the fact that the success of PDFA, published in 2005, in terms of number one, setting the stage for the idea of a purpose-built standard for PDF technology. PDFA, as you know, of course, is directed at archiving, but it led the way in terms of helping people to think that a PDF with a particular orientation to a particular interest was something that could in fact be standardized, that could be deployed out there. Obviously, we had the example of PDFX, which came before PDFA, particularly used in the print world. But PDFA, differently than PDFX, included Conformance Level A. Conformance Level A for PDFA is a rather general, rather vague statement of intent with respect to making PDF accessible in a PDFA document. And now it's possible to conform with PDFA Conformance Level A without going through all the good business of ensuring correct reading order, ensuring that tags are semantically correct, and so on. PDFA Conformance Level A, you can effectively conform with it. I don't advise that you do, but you can conform with it by simply throwing a single paragraph tag around all the content on a page and walking off. So nonetheless, PDFA was a great indicator, I think, to the people in the document world as opposed to in the print world, that in fact you could leverage interesting possibilities with respect to enhancing the perception of the product of PDF, and in terms of creating more possibilities for interesting and dynamic products as a function of the development of international standards for PDF. So as we've previously observed, tagged PDF is damn difficult. High quality tagged PDF depends on many things coming together, which might be expressed in Boolean terms. Number one, you need source file authoring tools that support semantic and metadata information required for accessibility. It has to be possible to create a table. It has to be possible to enable lists and so on. Otherwise, it's not going to be. You're not going to get a particular result in a PDF. So that's a very basic level of requirement. Microsoft Word can do these things, although it can't do them all. And I apologize to my friends at Microsoft who aren't here right now, but I will have to beat them up on this one point. You can't do, even though the format supports it, the docx format supports it, you cannot actually define a row header in a Microsoft Word file, and thus you cannot produce a PDF from Microsoft Word that includes a table with row headers. And so there are certainly limitations even in the so-called, even in the industry-leading word processor at this time. In addition, of course, to source file authoring tools that can do the right job, you need end users who actually use these tools with some awareness of accessibility needs. We were talking about this quite a bit at lunch. And that is an ongoing problem that will, in terms of the tools that can be used to help solve that problem, there's an enormous amount of work to be done in terms of refining the educational methodologies within software. How do people learn how to use Microsoft Word? I think a long time ago, Microsoft gave up on Clippy, that little gadget that would pop up and get in your face whenever you try to do this or that in a tool. Everybody hated it and they killed it as fast as they could. It would be really too bad if that was the kind of lesson that software developers took away in terms of trying to instruct the user. The users need this help. They're not necessarily going to come ask for it. What they need are gentle, quiet, and nonetheless persistent ways in which software might get in their face to say, that if that's really a table, maybe you don't want to put your entire document's contents inside of one cell, as somebody who was mentioning at lunch today is certainly something that happens. And there are a variety of relatively obvious circumstances that could come up in documents which just shouldn't be there. And so there are interesting opportunities to educate the user. In addition to end users employing tools with some awareness of accessibility needs, you also need end users employing these tools in a reasonably consistent fashion. It's not okay if a user goes ahead and uses a table to establish, to lay stuff out on a page and place something on the left, something on the right, something in the middle. And if they go along and then the next page they use tab stops to do the same thing, it's impossible to write software that's going to be able to accommodate these kinds of situations. Once users learn a particular methodology that produces a viable, accessible result, they need to be encouraged to repeat that. PDF producer software needs to be capable of using inputs from authoring software to write tagged PDF. That is probably pretty obvious since I'm talking to a bunch of developers, but I figured it is necessary, and a very great many tools can't do that. As we were hearing from Michael Fuchs from Abby earlier today, speaking in response to a question, the particular decision made in that piece of software involves using a printer driver to produce a PDF file from the original. I understand perfectly well that choice in terms of software development will eliminate the possibility of taking structure information from the source and doing something useful with it in terms of the downstream PDF. And what that means from an accessibility point of view is you have to revisit the decision to use a printer driver to be your PDF generator. End users, so PDF producer software has to be capable of using inputs from authoring software. End users must opt to use such PDF producer software to create tagged PDF. One of the major stumbling blocks to creating tagged PDF, certainly a few generations of Acrobat ago, because it was a lot slower at making tagged PDF then. Essentially, when you called up the the Adobe Make PDF plugin, you had a checkbox which is to enable tagged PDF, enable reflow in an output PDF file. Well, plenty of users discovered that when their document was any sort of length at all, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 pages, checking that checkbox caused the PDF creation time to triple or worse. And simply for that reason alone, plenty of users would deactivate that feature. They wanted that PDF faster. Well, I understand the user's desire to get that PDF faster. At the same time, it's extremely unfortunate that they would be defeating such an important feature as accessibility simply for that particular purpose. And this is the kind of thing that probably can be addressed in software development terms relatively easily. He says, as the non-developer in the room. Last but not least, PDF producer software has to be capable of creating properly tagged PDF given the crazy inputs. Now, people will do all kinds of funky things. They will put headings inside of, well, actually that's legitimate. I'm actually going to show that in a little bit. There are many circumstances which will result in, which will be problematic, and I'll cover some of them in a little bit here. Just to give you one example, a list. We were talking about this at lunch as well. It's possible to take a perfectly decent list and break it in half and not notice that you've broken it in half and then proceed and finish up deliver your document. The difference to a user who has to use assistive technology to understand the document is profound. In the one case, they'll encounter a list of 10 items, and that's a perfectly reasonable piece of information. In the second instance, they'll run into a list they'll run into that same page which has two lists, one of 7 items and one of 3 items. What are they to make from that? How could they relate how could they relate their perception of that content to some other user who's looking at the exact same page and says, "What do you mean? Of course the list has 10 items on it," right? That's just unfair. So content, tasks, and authors are all kind of difficult when it comes to this subject. Most authoring software doesn't do much to encourage author focused on semantics. As I've observed in my previous sessions, structure tools are typically conflated with styling, so that the user is in the position where they're busily styling their document, and then the styling is presumed to also be the driver of structure. And that's not necessarily true. These things need to be, or ideally would be either presented in straightforward terms that distinguish structure from style, or at the very least would provide a facility where the user understood the significance of what they were doing. This problem, I honestly, the problem of complexity is one that is simply going to be about smarter software to help the user avoid the complex problems. I'm not here to tell you how to write it or even how to conceive of it, but I am here to tell you that users have an enormous amount of difficulty with the complexity of considering accessibility requirements in documents, and software, among other things, needs to be able to help support them by reducing that perceived complexity. So here's what they do today. They create tagged PDF from scratch, the users who can, using InDesign, MS Word with or without Acrobat, because of course Microsoft can also make a tagged PDF. OpenOffice does that job as well, and then the user has to, if they're aware of it, performs manual touch-up as needed. Many PDF files and the world of creating from scratch, creating from the authoring software is critical. It is, at the end of the day, the big picture solution to accessible PDF will only come when people are authoring accessible PDF files directly. However, in the short and medium term, and maybe also in the long term, plenty of high-value PDF files will be generated without tags. And these ones are characteristically in the present day. These are auto-tagged in Adobe Acrobat. There's no other software I'm aware of that does it. And then, of course, modified to tweak to bring up to scratch in terms of being adequate accessible files. Let's move on here. So minimum characteristics of accessible content. I'll run through this quickly and get to a few examples of how these sorts of things can have been addressed. These features are not specific to PDF, but are nonetheless considered critical to accessibility and WCAG 2.0 conformance, in addition to PDF UA conformance. It's critical, for example, to have valid reading order and alternative text for non-text content. This is a phrase I've stolen from WCAG. Information and relationships must be programmatically ascertainable, which is to say a relationship between headings. That's why this is why headings or tables have to be correctly. WCAG 2 doesn't mention tables in any way. It simply says information has to be programmatically accessible. It's for the developer to understand that a table is a structure that is programmatically ascertainable and thus can be represented to the user. It's vital that the content provide no meaning to the end user by means of color, contrast, or sensory characteristics. You can't rely on the fact that a particular object is on the left-hand side of the page. That is an inadequate indication. If that is intended to convey information, it is inadequate as such. There must be, in addition to not providing meaning by means of color or contrast, there has to be in a PDF or in any content sufficient contrast to ensure legibility. It's not okay to use a dark charcoal background and then to use a color of type on it that's very similar, or a very light background with ivory colored type. It's an inaccessible result from the point of view. Plenty of people who are certainly not blind will nonetheless have a great deal of difficulty perceiving that content. Flashing or blinking elements are a big no-no because they cause tremendous problems for users who suffer epilepsy. Accessible controls for multimedia. You can probably imagine that there would be almost nothing, apart from being completely unable to read at all, there's probably almost nothing more frustrating than landing on a web page and having a movie start playing at you and being unable to do anything about it except turn off your own speakers. You can imagine that would be nightmarish. As I've mentioned earlier, it's critical that you not include focus changes without the user being aware of those changes. In principle, anytime you want to move the user around, change their context, you need to inform that user, you need to educate them that you're about to do that. Apart from critical components of accessibility, there are other ones that are key. Key is distinguished from critical in the sense that it's still possible to understand the content without these things being true. It's just extremely unfriendly to the user to deploy this way. Consistent navigation and identification of elements. It's very unfortunate if the links to the home page appear differently on this, that, and the other page. This makes it very arduous for a user to get used to the particular structure and organization of a website. Images of text, of course, while it's possible to as a general matter, to have, or certainly in PDF, we have a good solution for images of text. We have this attribute called actual text. But otherwise, it's very necessary to, one would tend to avoid images of text because there are things that don't readily redeploy in various kinds of assistive technology. And you want to minimize redundant interactive elements. It's a no-no in WCAG, and for sure, and you can imagine relatively bad practice anywhere. If you have 15 links on a page that point at the exact same place, and if your AT user has to check out each link effectively to figure out where they go, that's an enormous burden on them. And it should be mentioned as well that while in the PDF world we have a special responsibility to be able to represent any document, right? We're not in the business of telling the theoretical physicist that he has to change the way he writes. That's absolutely not what we're about. From an accessibility point of view, however, we would want to say that, that table that you designed that's like really super complicated, it would be preferable from an accessibility point of view if perhaps you did your table in a slightly different way that made it more accessible. And we don't insist on this. That's not for us to do. We're in the business of producing documents and representing the author's intent as much as we possibly can. But this is the goal of simplicity in the structures that are represented to the user is a very valuable goal with respect to making accessible content clear and easy to consume. So there are minimum characteristics of accessible PDF files that I'll briefly mention here. Number one, and this doesn't often get mentioned, but security. There are limitations on the security that can be employed in a PDF file. Adobe Reader has this feature. You should go check it out. It's built into it. Adobe Reader, while it allows you to secure a PDF file in certain ways, you can check a box in the dialog that allows the accessibility API to nonetheless access the text in the file. The PDF must include searchable, reusable text, embedded fonts so that it looks correct when reflowed, and Unicode mapping so that when the content is extracted, that is the process by which by a screen reader and other assistive technology work. When that content is extracted, we have to be able to know what it is that we're looking at when we extract it. So Unicode mappings are critical. Scanned pages have to be OCR'd, as has been said. OCR output accuracy must be very high. It must be high because scrambled OCR results in illegibility and illegibility that cannot necessarily be overcome by reading in context. I started off in the PDF industry as the owner of a scanning service bureau. We specialized actually in OCR and doing OCR to a very high quality level. 99.995% accuracy is roughly equivalent to one OCR error every 20 pages on typical content. Not easy to do, but nonetheless and that's an arbitrary quality level that I've selected, but it's a realistic top of the line quality level that's possible for the most part. Obviously it depends on what you're sticking into your OCR, but that would be tip for average content, whatever that means. Real content tagged with semantically appropriate tags in valid reading order. I won't drone on about that at this time. Artifact page content marked appropriately, which is to say so that it will not be interpreted as part of the document structure by assistive technology. Accurate language identification, alternative descriptions, interactive navigational elements must be fully labeled so that they're clear to the user. And other content allows AT to correctly identify that this is a checkbox, and that was a text field, and this is a button, and so on and so forth. I didn't mean to include that one. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples of how people have attempted to build software or attempted to address these sorts of issues, and also some of the kind of characteristic problems that users will encounter. The first image on this slide is a picture of the Microsoft Word productivity ribbon, which was actually a development, I believe, out of a collaboration from a couple of universities in Texas. It basically is a grouping of Microsoft's tools together in a single ribbon that pertain to ensuring a document is accessible. And this ribbon is one that in principle, if you're having authors authoring for accessibility, you'd encourage them to work from this ribbon and to use the various tools in it, because they focus very much on the kind of structuring questions that are necessary for a document as opposed to the styling questions. So the productivity ribbon is one example. The other example represented here is a screenshot of Microsoft Word's outline view. Now, it's actually a very cool feature in Microsoft Word. You may not have run into it too much because the features that are available to the user from an editing and markup point of view are actually very limited when you're in outline view, which is what has prompted certain folks to say to me, even though I've said to Microsoft once or twice, that's a great feature. You guys could really bulk that up and turn it into a way for people to author accessible content very readily. Yes, they said, but nobody uses outline view. Well, maybe it's not particularly well developed yet. So these are one shouldn't be led to believing that one doesn't have a good thing going simply because you haven't gone all the way yet. Microsoft Outline View is one that I hope is developed further forward to help authors understand what it is that they're doing with respect to accessible content. Here's another example. This is so routine, so conventional, so normal in the world of authoring that it feels almost kind of strange to point it out and harp on it as being something that might even be a little bit negative. But we're looking right now at a screenshot of the Tiny MCE styling, what do we call this? The toolbar that they provide. Otherwise, high quality functionality. Certainly, if you've got the use of your eyes and a pair of hands, you're in pretty good shape with this thing. On the other hand, if you're trying to figure out how to distinguish structure from style, you might be a little confused. So on the screenshot, I've placed blue highlighted boxes to indicate structure elements or ways in which you would manipulate your content via structure, and red boxes to indicate the styling features. So you could see that they're directly that the implementation mixes them up in the sense that where the same exact drop-down feature where I select headings or a paragraph, I can also select something called address or pre-formatted. Now, as I recall, address is not really a structural concept, and neither, quite frankly, is pre-formatted. Why? It's a convention in terms of how to in terms of these kinds of tools. It's not only Tiny MCE that's done it this way. But from my point of view, it's quite bizarre. This is, on the one hand, we have structuring tools, on the other hand, formatting, and here they're completely mashed together. That's not really helping people understand that there's a difference between structuring and styling. Likewise, we have we have inline. I could like this interface in a number of areas, but the mixing paragraphs and headings in with address and pre-formatted styles, I don't know what else to call them. They are styles, they're not structure. Just drives me nuts. Otherwise, there's some sense to it. Having a distinction between style, the styles box that I've got highlighted there is where you'd select whatever CSS class you want to apply to your content. CSS not always, but characteristically often used for the purposes of applying straightforward styling information. It's not structural for the most part. And then over there on the right, we have some inline styling elements which are appropriate in terms of having them be distinct from the class-based styles. So, among the various kinds of subjects that can raise concerns for implementers, the simplest content can raise all kinds of interesting and difficult questions. And so I ask you on this particular page, right, is there non-text content on this page? If so, what's the alternate text, right? I won't put you on the spot necessarily for this, but perhaps we can come back to this a little later. Assuming there is, let's take it a different route. Let's assume that all the non-text content you see in this screenshot, this example from a PDF file, all the non-text content are simple vector graphics. How many artifacts would there be here, right? How would you tag this section of content? What's the appropriate way of tagging this particular section? Now, pretty obviously we've got a heading, okay? under the heading, and I'm not trying to trick anybody with this yet, under the heading a paragraph, no difficulties there, and under that paragraph probably another paragraph. Now we come to something that's kind of looking awfully kind of graphical, right? We have effectively a horizontal bar graph here, two parameters, available and paid out, and then values for each one of those. There are a variety of options to tag this, right? One option that, and I would not be able to distinguish, if somebody said to me, I'm going to tag this as a figure and add alternative text to it, I might wince, but I would accept it. It's not wrong to do that. Would it make a difference? Does it make a difference if this object, this blue box inside, underneath the couple of paragraphs here, what if that was an image as opposed to text? Well, it makes it relatively obvious and easy, right? You would apply alt text in that case. But what if? But in fact, it's also a collection of text and vector graphics. It would be possible to wrap all those objects in a single figure tag and go ahead and add alt text to that. Not strictly speaking wrong. You could also tag the word available and the $1.68 billion as a paragraph, and with another paragraph below it for paid out, and then the amount in millions. You could tag this as a list, where you had a list of two list items, one list item available, 1.68 billion, the second list item paid out, 271.92 million. Bunch of different ways you could handle it, and I, who've been doing this for some time, would be hard-pressed to say to you, it's absolutely not a two-item list. Or, and you might say, what do you mean a list? I don't see a list here. It's a table. Of course it's a table. Down on the table row headers are available and paid out. The table data cells are 1.68 billion and 271.92 million. A bunch of different possibilities. Tags can span several pages in a document. This is challenging if the way you're approaching the question of tagged PDF is on a per page basis. Okay, it's very frequently the case that tags that tables spill over, that tags encounter multiple pages, and in such cases it will be necessary to knit together the tag structures from those multiple pages together. Oops. Or how about this one? This is actually I got lazy, and I was looking for a document that had a 2-page spread, and I got lazy and I reached back to 1992, which is why you can see that this is an advertisement for Intel i386 processors. But leaving that aside, this is where I found an example of a PDF file that included a spread through the gutter, right? In this case, how do we tag this page? Right? We've got a case where some characters let's look at that heading down there, ask for genuine Intel math coprocessors. Well, as you can tell, the words math coprocessors happen on the second page, and then indeed the heading continues back on the previous page with or who knows what, and then continues yet again on the third page. So here we have a case where to tag this thing correctly, you'd start tagging on one page, you go to the next page, tag a little bit more, return to the previous page, put that content in your same heading tag, and move it once more to the next page. So here you have a tag that's going to span the same 2 pages 3 times. That's the correct way to tag that. And when you ask yourself, what's the other way to tag that? The answer is, there's no other way to tag it. Okay, there's some fun here for others. I don't know why I put that heading in there. The heading's inappropriate. Leaving aside the heading. All right, so this is a question, and Matthew raised this a little earlier. Is this, I have an example of a table on the screen here. Is this one table or 2 tables with headings in between them? We have a heading clearly for data acquisition and processing. We then have a section of a table that appears to operate under the heading of steady state data. But what the author of the table has clearly done is that they've used a table tool once to create a larger table under which they've got 2 separate subsections of content. I would prefer to be relatively cautious before I tell the implementer that this is a case where you should be able to detect that this is not actually one table. And indeed, there's a strong argument to be made that, that because an author has used a table and has explicitly defined a table that covers a couple of different sections, and that it's up to them. If they want to have rows, if they want to have rows that span all the columns and use those as a kind of informal separator between sections, as long as they structure their table correctly, that's their right. Yeah, okay, understand that. But would the question differ depending upon how you? Does it matter whether or not the authoring tool did it one way because there was originally a table there? Let's say I encountered this file. It was provided to me and it was not tagged. Would I be justified in tagging it the same way? Would I need to tag this all as a single table? Well, in truth, it would actually take me a lot more work to tag this as a single table because it's a complex table. It requires linking headers and IDs. It requires treating the word steady state data as perhaps a row header instead of what it appears to be, which is a column header, and likewise with a heading below it. You get in a kind of a complex mental situation quite quickly if you want to treat this thing as a single table. If you actually treat it as two separate tables with headings in between, both of those tables are extremely simple right away. And yet, and you're not being driven by, dare I say, the styling of the zebra striping between the table rows. No longer is your guiding force with respect to telling you what the author's intent was. Now, there's another interesting case here. The argument for allowing it as a single table is stronger for one important reason. The headings within each one of these table sections are the same. System, channels, and sample frequency are both TH headings, that apply to the upper and to the lower table. But what if the data is different? Okay, the exact same tool was used to design the table, but in this case, and I've sort of physically modified my screenshot of the table here to make the point. Instead of now the row headers aren't the same in each example of this table. It turns out that the author, while they used the table tool once to create one large table, the heading in their second table section, if I can use that term, is frequency range instead of sample frequency. Okay? Now is it two tables? How come it became, if it is two tables now where it was one table before, how did that happen as a function? The table structure didn't change. Some content changed in the table, right? So does the content actually alter our perception of whether or not there was in fact table structure here and what that table structure should be? And this is the kind of question that you can have a lot of fun with, this kind of question. So there are a lot of things that could be done to help authors develop there are a lot of prospective tools out there that could be developed to help authors do the right thing or do interesting things with their content. Validation of logical order is something that I could demonstrate actually in a minute here. Is a key question. I will actually demonstrate it in a minute, depending on the time that we have. Logical order, as has been pointed out in earlier sessions, does not the order in which content is written to the page, the content reading order of the PDF is in many cases, in the vast majority of cases, not the same thing as the logical reading order, and it has to be accounted for in that particular way. So it's important to be able to preview the logical reading order, or to make sure in effect that there's as little conflict as possible between the content reading order and the logical order, and to resolve it and to make sure that logical reading order is always respected. Validation of semantic structures. It's often the case that a user uses boldface instead of a heading. Was that in fact should there be emphasis on there? Well, leaving aside the fact there's no emphasis tag in PDF as of 1.7, what do we do with that fact that users appears to have, by way of separation from another paragraph, by way of change in font weight or font size or font type, choice of font, appears to have indicated a heading, but they didn't tag it that way. They didn't actually use H2 in that particular instance. Maybe it's time to ask them if they were intended to use H2. That was a validation of use of inline styles for structure. Intelligent grouping of content into logical figures. Not infrequently, there'll be cases where content for a given chart, for example, includes text that's part of the chart that indicates, for example, in a Venn diagram that labels different components of it. Because this is all content written to the page, if you just tag this thing with a tool that looked for and prioritized the tagging of text and made sure that it was handled in paragraph tags, you might wind up very readily with a situation where you have a figure and then components of that figure, the text within that figure, is actually tagged independently from that figure. Well, now all that you've done from an accessibility point of view is take the content that was a part of the figure and abstract it away from the figure. The correct thing to do in that case would be to collect all those pieces of content together under a single figure tag. Intelligent alt text and alt text generation for figures. Ideally, and this might not be in the short term, certainly, but users need a lot of help in terms of being prompted to add alternative text when it's called for, and even in terms of writing that alternative text. When it comes to cases such as representations of text with an image, for example, to take a piece of text and use it as a heading, and you might use an image, or an author might choose to use an image in this case because they wish some specific styling attributes that wouldn't be available to them via fonts and so on. It might be possible to, when they're deploying that kind of content, to ask the user, hey, what text does this image represent? What text should be used in place of this image if we're trying to represent our content to a user who otherwise isn't going to be able to understand your image? Footnotes are an interesting case. Footnotes, of course, appear out of line with the logical reading order of a document. That's the whole purpose of a footnote, is it's a way to skip out of a current position in content, go down to the bottom of the page, or in the case of endnotes, go to the end of the document, read some additional explanatory text, and then, if you weren't using assistive technology, return to your previous place of reading in the document and continue as before. Now, in the case of PDF, as of 1.7, and this, by the way, will be changed in PDF 2.0 and 32,000 Part 2, we'll have an explicit mechanism to allow you to be able to do things like take a superscript figure, identify it as a link as a reference to a note that happens at the bottom of the page, allow the user to when they encounter that, it would allow you to develop an implementation that would have the user encounter the footnote indicator, move down, read that footnote, and then return to their previous place in the page. This is something that, today the solution for this, and again, experts will differ on this. My own feeling is that it's important to tag that footnote in line with its logical appearance in the content stream. Otherwise, the AT user who's limited to the logical structure of as represented by tags has no way to associate the footnote content at the bottom of the page with its original position in the text. Document structure deficiencies, headings, perfecting OCR results. I mentioned that earlier. Users need help in terms of when they're doing OCR, they need to be prompted to correct the OCR. There has to be provision made to enable them to correct it. In particular, they have to be offered the opportunity to find those sections of false positives, that content that shouldn't have been OCR'd but was, and get rid of it. C, better identification of tagging errors and inconsistencies. This is particularly case for remediation of existing documents, but exists in other cases. Very frequently, you'll have a table in which one line of a table is, or a particular table cell has 2 lines of text instead of 1. Okay, I'm taking too much time here. Thank you, Olaf. So you can read the rest, and the rest of the slide the slide, of course, will be provided for your download later. But there are a variety of aspects that would make life a lot easier for folks, ranging from language identification, identifying and addressing 2 Unicode deficiencies, multiple threads, giving users tools to be able to preview the page in a high contrast mode so that they can, for example, find out if there are problems in terms of content disappearing as a result of contrast changes. So there's a variety of information available to help you understand how you should be developing towards along these lines. Number 1, there are 2 documents. Number 1, the implementation guide for PDF UA1, as produced by the U.S. Committee for PDF UA and published on the AIM website. The link is here. Obviously, this PDF will be available to you when the PDF Association posts it. So you can go to the AIM website, search for this, you'll find it right away. Likewise, if what's important to you is WCAG 2.0, the same committee has produced a document that allows you to understand how to achieve WCAG 2.0 using PDF UA. And of course, we in the PDF Association, PDF UA Competence Center are very excited about our forthcoming publication of the Matterhorn Protocol 1.0, which is intended specifically to help implementers evolve ways to check the documents that are being produced or PDF files to ascertain whether or not they're sufficiently accessible. And there are a variety of human and machine-mediated checkpoints that are elaborated. It's essentially a testable, a breakdown of PDF UA into a bunch of testable failure conditions. That's coming next May. So that's, I'd love to take any questions that you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Duff.